Rock Island Auction Company's inaugural premier firearms auction this December down at our new location in Bedford, Texas, is absolutely stacked with incredible firearms from the American West. And when it comes to classic antique American firearms, the Winchester Model 1873 is one of the classic iconic guns of the American West, one of the guns that won the West, and none of them is more iconic than the Winchester 1 of 1000 lever action rifles. Over the last nearly 10 years here at Rock Island Auction Company, I have got the privilege to handle some absolutely incredible Winchesters, but I have to say, without a doubt, this one and Granville Stuart's rifles are my absolute favorites, and if you had to pick between the two, Thomas Stuart's rifle has it all. So just like Granville Stuart's rifle, it's got that classic American frontier Montana history. Same classic, very scarce configuration. One of only two, including Granville's being the other one, that has the Style 3 style inscription here on the top of the barrel. But what Thomas Stuart's 1 of 1000 has, that basically no 1 of 1000 has, is it has everything. It's got the 1 of 2 inscription. It's got a personal inscription with his name on the side and the date down below. It's got 4X deluxe walnut stock, and it retains beautiful condition. I mean, it's got a high percentage of the original blue and case colors still remaining on these guns. If you look at most of these 1 of 1000s, they were actually used. They were special ordered by people because they wanted the most accurate rifle available. They weren't ordered to be safe queens. They were ordered to be the best of the best. So most of these rifles show signs of real use. With Granville Stuart's rifle, we had history documenting it being used multiple times through the generations by the family, so it had signs of use. When you take a look at Thomas Stuart's rifle, he probably used it, but he clearly took incredible care of this rifle. It has been passed down through the generations over more than a century now in incredibly high condition that is just impossible to beat. Thomas Stuart, the man who received this rifle in 1875, was the younger of the Stuart brothers, highly influential figures in the history of Montana. His older brother, Granville Stuart, is nicknamed, Mr. Montana, because he was one of the key figures in the founding of the state. In the 1850s, their father Robert, Granville, and James all went to California searching for gold during the California Gold Rush. Thomas was too young, so he remained behind with the family here in Iowa for several more years. But then during the 1860s, he went to the West, searching for gold during the Colorado Gold Rush at Pikes Peak. While there, he received a letter from his older brother Granville telling him of the gold they had found in western Montana and urging him to come along. Thomas actually showed the letter to some of his other mining companions in Colorado, which led to the gold rush in Montana in the early 1860s. En route to getting to Montana, Thomas actually got stuck and ended up in Idaho for a period of time mining, and then arrived in Montana in 1864. Once in Montana, Thomas worked with his older brothers in their stores, he worked in some of the mining claims, and then kind of struck out on his own and also sought his own wealth. So he continued to prospect all the way into the 1890s, off and on working with his brother and other business associates in Montana, based out of Deer Lodge, which is actually the second oldest town in all of the Montana Territory in the time period. So it's a frontier community way out in the western Montana, and he's out there searching for gold, along the valleys and the gulches, looking for gold with his brothers, with other business partners. At the same time, there's very little settlement actually going on in Montana. So he's a true pioneer of the Montana Territory. In 1873, tragically, their older brother James died. So Granville becomes, the family patriarch. Their father had died earlier on, and now James had died, so Granville's now the oldest man in the family. So he gets closer and closer with his brother Thomas. But while Granville's the patriarch, from what we can tell, Thomas was actually the more successful of the brothers. He was more financially successful. He was actually loaning Granville money. So after James dies in 1873, just a few years later, Granville orders this rifle and his own from Winchester, and they send these rifles out in 1875. One of the things that's really interesting about this rifle and Granville's is they're actually the second pair of 1 of 1000s the Stuart brothers received. The first pair had the earlier style, numerical written 1/1000 on the barrel, didn't have the sights Granville had specifically ordered, so he actually rejected those and complained to Winchester and very specifically said what he wanted. That led to the nicer, the fancier Style 3 inscription that's on this rifle in Granville's, which reads 1/1000 in script with some nice engraving on the border. These two rifles are the only third style inscriptions on any 1/1000s, and it set the stage for the fourth style that then becomes the standard after, which included some more engraving on the sides of the markings as well. In Granville's original order, he specified that he wanted 2 of your 1/1000 rifles, 24-inch octagon barrels, set triggers, and finely engraved. In fact, the finest guns made by you, but not plated. Model of 1873, center fire, fitted with hunting sights and also peep rear sight, with beach front sight, also a wiping rod, and all appurtenances and leather case for each, full length of the gun. He added, "If these guns are as accurate as they should be, and as well finished as described, I think many can be sold in this territory." On November 15th, 1874, he wrote to Winchester again, adding some more specifics to his order. He noted that his goal was to get rifles in superior finish and desired the rifles to be, quote, "as absolutely accurate as you can make them," because he intended to use them in shooting matches. After receiving the original 2 rifles that he ultimately rejected, he wrote back to Winchester on May 20th, 1875, stating, "The 2 1/1000 rifles ordered by me arrived in good order, but I am disappointed in them because you did not send such as I ordered, nor did you give any explanation as to why you did not follow the terms of my order." He subsequently wrote back to them again, saying he wanted nothing but 1/1000 rifles, and repeated that he wanted, quote, 2 of your very finest, not plated, 1/1000 rifles. Now, with the exception of the wood in the model 1873, I do not see that the guns are any better finished than your common ones. There is not a single line of engraving on them, and you did not send a hunting sight nor a beach front sight, nor did you send the leather cases, and although you state the sights are adjusted to 1,000 yards, yet I find upon inspection that their greatest range is only 850 yards. He added that he had some cause to be dissatisfied with Winchester's handling of his order, but did note that they shot remarkably well. On June 14th, 1875, he again writes to Winchester. He's basically trying to get the right guns this time. He doesn't want them to screw up his order like they had the first time. So he specifies that his new rifles should come with both hunting sights and globe and peep sights, and the latter graduated out to 1,000 yards. And he specifically notes, quote, "On some appropriate place on this latter, engrave in fancy text surrounded by a wreath of flowers my name and the date. This, Granville Stuart, 1875. And on the other, Thomas Stuart, 1875, in the same styles. The guns to, of course, be 1/1000, engraved and finished in your best style. I also want the words 1/1000 in fancy letters, and surrounded by a wreath or other appropriate border, for the figures on those guns you sent before, 1/1000, are neither neat nor of a handsome appearance." In that last comment, you can directly see how Granville Stuart's specifics in ordering these rifles is what led to this 3rd style inscription that's found on the barrels and the 4th style that followed. It's basically the same thing, but with a little more extra engraving here on the side. You can also see why Winchester went out of their way to send such incredible rifles to Granville and Thomas. They were influential figures on the frontier, and they had already basically pissed Granville Stuart off. They had sent him guns that weren't what he ordered, that didn't look good, and if you look at some of the early 1/1000s, you can kind of see that. They didn't look nearly as fancy as this. So what they did this time around was they sent out beautifully finished guns with nice blue, perfectly inscribed inscriptions in the barrel. A really tasteful amount of engraving. That's one of the things I really like about Granville and Thomas Stuart's 1/1000s. If you take a look, they've got really clean, beautifully executed scrollwork, but it's not over the top. It's just nice little touches here and there because these are meant to be used out on the frontier. You don't want a bunch of fancy gold and nonsense like that. You want some nice classic scrollwork, their names and the date crisply inscribed on the side plates here. And then you can see this time they actually got the peep sights right. And honestly, on both Granville and Thomas's guns, probably the finest wood you're ever going to see on a Winchester 1873. I mean, if you look at the figure on these guns, it's amazing. When you take a look at Thomas's rifle and Granville's rifle, you can tell they went all out on these guns to make sure that Granville and Thomas were happy with their rifles, to help solidify Winchester's reputation on the frontier. This is 1875. The Model 1873 is still very new. If you take a look at the rifles, they're the early 1873s. They've got the sliding dust cover that rides in the mortise is in the frame rather than the later styles. If you look at the guns, there's no caliber markings on them at all because they're early 73s, so all of them were 4440. There was no reason to put a caliber marking on these guns. So guns like this truly established the Winchester 1873 as the gun that would eventually win the West. Guns like this being placed in the hands of frontiersmen like Granville and Thomas Stuart. We know Winchester succeeded in impressing Granville Stuart because again, he wrote to them in September 1875 after receiving the rifles. He wrote that the rifles, quote, which arrived yesterday are perfect in every particular. They are far superior to any rifle made, except for very long-range shooting. And I am not sure that I will not make even that exception. For today, at my first trial of my gun, I made a 45 out of a possible 60 at 500 yards. And I expect to be able to reach a 55 at my next trial. When I get it down to a scratch, I will send you some of my scores. One of the things that's interesting about that last letter is it specifically shows that Granville intended these rifles to be used in long-range rifle matches, which was a booming sport in the time period, especially on the frontier where they could take shots like that at long-ranged animals. So they would practice in rifle competitions, shooting against other teams at 500 and even 1,000 yards with black powder cartridges. That's why they wanted a 1,000-yard sight. They needed to be able to shoot a 1,000-yard target with these rifles. From studying Granville and his brother and reading into their lives, searching through newspapers from the time period, we know that Granville and Thomas were both excellent shots. They competed against the team from Helena in 1875 and then again in 1876. In the first match, Thomas Stuart was the best marksman overall, shot better than Granville in both the 500 and 1,000-yard match. Granville, as the team leader, brings home the prized rifle, a Remington Creedmoor rifle that we actually sold back when we sold the John Fox collection. And Thomas continued to use a regular Sharp sporting rifle as his long-range gun. In the next match in 1876, Thomas actually loses to Granville. He scores 2 points lower than Granville. But if you take a look at the targets that were reproduced in the newspaper, you can actually see that Thomas still outshot Granville. He's only got 3 shots that are outside of the bullseye, and he loses to Granville by, I believe, 2 points. And if you look at his score, he's got 2 zeros on his scorecard because he had defective cartridges according to the newspaper report. So he shot 2 less shots than Granville and still only lost to him by 2 points. So that in my mind shows that of the two brothers, these famous frontiersmen, Thomas Stuart was the more accurate marksman. If you've been following our auctions over the last several years, it probably comes as no surprise that this incredible Winchester 1873 is coming to us from the McCroskey collection, one of the finest collections of antique Winchesters ever built. And this rifle is certain to be a crowning piece in any Winchester collection, any antique American firearms collection. This would become a centerpiece just from everything that it's got going for it. It is an incredible example of one of the rarest antique American firearms, one of the most desirable firearms in the world. And there's only a small number of these rifles that are still in existence, and in my mind, this is by far the most desirable because it has everything going for it, from condition to history to rarity. It's got it all, and this is just one of a bunch. An absolute load of absolutely incredible antique American firearms from the Old West coming up in our December premier firearms auction down in Bedford, Texas.